animal side, so to speak, as organism, eat today because tomorrow you may not find anything to eat for another couple of days. And so the combination of this is clearly obesity. Well, with the analogy, AI is generating a similar problem. We're generating sort of epistemologically obese people in the sense that they get used to ask the question, don't even care about even typing the question correctly, because if you type, no, if you make some typos, it doesn't matter. The interface will get it anyway. Get the answer, whatever the answer is. And it might be not even correct. It might be an hallucination, as we say in the context, or it might be just approximate. It might be even not a bit silly mistake. It doesn't matter. It's an answer, and you keep going. It's food anyway. So, well, with that is huge. But the analogy with obesity also speaks in terms of solution. Well, today we know that we shouldn't eat that stuff. Menus increasingly come with amount of calories. We are told since the beginning, no, don't eat too much, don't eat that fat, don't eat that things, no, too much sugar, etc., etc. So we're learning. We're learning slowly, more slowly than we should, and I hope that the AI impact will be absorbed more quickly. But society knows better. Now, whether individuals will save themselves, that's another story.
Hello, everyone. First, I would like to thank Beatriz Sois, Filosofia No Grata, Grumik, and Bismarck for their help with the script. Thank you, Professor Danilo, support this interview. Thank you, Professor Nitamar de Oliveira. Professor Luciano Floridi, è un onore essere qui di fronte a lei. Let's start, Professor Floridi, biographical questions. What initially motivated you to study philosophy? What was the intellectual context of that time, and how does it differ from the current one?
Okay, so I know that we have a lot of questions and we don't have much time, so I will try to be brief. But first of all, let me thank you for this great opportunity to talk to you. It's an honor, so thank you very much. So when I was in high school in Italy, we studied philosophy together with many other subjects. So especially in the kind of school I attended, and so I knew about philosophy. I had studied a little bit of philosophy for 3 years. I was very curious as a kid. I wanted to know everything, and I thought that the best way of knowing, understanding, explaining the world around me was to get into a very broad subject. Initially, I thought, okay, I want to understand the world, society, the politics, economics, etc. So I thought about economics, but then I thought, well, that would not allow me to go into, for example, literature or physics or chemistry, other things. Then I thought, well, okay, well, maybe the real language of knowledge is mathematics. So that was my second choice. Took some information, look at the degrees, etc. And then I realized that if I had chosen mathematics, I would have been able to do maybe some good work, perhaps, but not for a long time. And some disciplines would have been still not far from my reach. And then I realized that philosophy was going to give me the sort of license to go anywhere, from A to Z, that I could talk to people in psychology, people in zoology, in biology, in chemistry, in literature, in chemistry, in geography, in history. And I thought, okay, that's what I want to do. And that's how I went to Rome University to study philosophy. But of course, I was interested in mathematics, in economics. So I always do the kind of philosophy that speaks to the social sciences and speaks to the mathematical sciences. So I ended up by studying a lot of mathematical logic as a philosopher. What was the sort of culture and the atmosphere at the time? We're talking about the 80s. That was by now 40 years ago or so. And in Italy, there was a lot of history of philosophy. We were not really allowed or encouraged to study problems or contemporary issues. The pressure inevitably was about studying the classics. And at the time, I complained a lot because I wanted to engage with contemporary issues. I later realized that, at least as a background, it was very helpful because by the time I went to England and I did my master and my PhD and my postdoc, I had spent roughly 4 years as an undergraduate studying all the main classics, from Plato and Aristotle all the way to Wittgenstein and Heidegger, which meant that I didn't have to read those classics. And contrary to some of my colleagues who were much more able to deal with contemporary issues, but they had no idea who Descartes was, at least I knew, and I had read the Meditations. So I got lucky because I managed to combine, and I close here, a very continental, historically oriented, scholarly oriented education as an undergraduate with an analytically oriented, logic oriented, science friendly sort of secondary education as a master, PhD, and postdoc. So, in a way, I think I got lucky that I got the best of both sides. But I did complain a lot when I was younger because we were not allowed to study problems. We had to be experts on someone, not on something.
Okay, you have commented about this in your first answer that you are interested in mathematics and sociology, but could you comment your transition from philosophy of information that sometimes seems very logically driven to ethics of artificial intelligence? It was a internal motivation or like external, like what's happening in the world?
Probably both, but I've pursued my own research as independently as I could. No, you never know what kind of influences. No, as far as I can tell, it was a bit of a plan. Very early stage when I was at the end of my undergraduate studies, beginning of my graduate studies, I had always had a few, because of the history of philosophy, a few main authors in mind as sort of my kind of philosophical heroes. And perhaps if I have to choose only one, that is Immanuel Kant. And so I thought, well, if I have a chance of following, of course, as a small kid, the same path, and start from something that is much more epistemology and logic oriented, but then end with much more ethics and political, if you like, even philosophy. That would be a good way of progressing. So when I ended up at Oxford doing my postdoc, and I had this intuition of working on the philosophy of information, the plan was since the beginning basically to do these different volumes. So I spoke to Oxford University Press. At the time, we were all young. I mean, I was a postdoc, and there was another young guy there, Peter Momchilov, who was the editor of the OUP. And I spoke to Peter, and he said, well, why don't you start working one book at a time? I said, what do you want to start? I think I need to start on the epistemological, more sort of logical and philosophy of science foundations of the philosophy of information. Then I can move from, say, epistemology to logic, and from logic to ethics. I said, okay, well, that's the plan. And so I started. I'm still working on that plan, like 30 years later. I don't think I'm almost done, but fingers crossed, I'm going to finish before I retire.
Oh, that's good to hear because I was concerned when you said that ends with logic. I was like,
No, no,
oh
no,
no.
no. So, in fact, actually, I'm increasingly convinced that the story that we tell, this is a paper I'm writing, so it has not been published yet, but give me a few more months. But the story is the following. We inherit from our self-understanding of the discipline a bit of a story about modern philosophy, how we move from metaphysics in the past, ancient philosophy, medieval philosophy, to epistemology during modernity, Descartes onwards, and then how we move from there to logic and philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, more contemporary philosophy. I think that is wrong. I grew up with that story, and I know that I had to lose that particular skin and be reborn, if you like. But that story, first of all, it doesn't fit the actual history of philosophy. But above all, it puts in the wrong order what matters most and what is necessary to do what matters most. We got confused about what is the foundational work, which is a lot of epistemology, logic, metaphysics, etc., versus against what really matters, which is ethics, political philosophy, philosophy of law, social science, impact. Now, just because you have to have a starting point and that has to be solid, it doesn't mean that that is the goal of the analysis. So I am changing completely. Now, it took me decades to realize this, but the order in which we do things is not the order of importance. You know, 1, 2, 3, but the important thing is 3. You start from 1, the foundations, in order to get to the ultimate goal, which is what kind of life do we want to have? What kind of society we want to live in? What kind of environment do we want to protect? And so on. And today, therefore, it is crucial to understand our digital society in a logical, epistemological, philosophy of science way. But in order to get to the point of getting the ethics right, the legal normative analysis right, etc. So instead of focusing so much on foundations as if they were a goal in themselves, understanding foundations as a means to an end, well, that's my definitely my understanding at this stage of my own project. So I'm finally getting to the real important part. It took me decades, but now is the most important bit that I need to work on.
Professor Chano, I have a question. In your view, what is the rule of ethics? Is to identify principles from the action of the world? Is ethics a natural phenomenon or merely social convention? Or does it necessarily relate to genetic factors?
So, ethics, of course, we can agree on terms, and sometimes it's just a matter of vocabulary. And there's a lot of freedom out there to understand ethics in whichever way one wants. On a personal basis, I'm a bit of a sort of classic line here. Ethics is something that tells you how things should go, how they are not going at the moment, sometimes unfortunately, but how they could go. So it's not a description of a life, a society, an environment, a process. That would be, for example, something produced by sociology or anthropology or economics, a social science. It is really a matter of understanding what's the project, what kind of world we want to live in, and how do we get from here to there. So what I ought to do in order to be a decent person. Is this something allowed or not? Are there sort of general rules that improve our social life together, and so on? So the emphasis is on the normative side, not the descriptive side. Now, of course, you need to understand. So I'm not the kind of philosopher who thinks that ethics can disregard social understanding, economic pressure, political power, etc. Of course not. But once you have all that understanding, there's still a project to develop. It's a little like saying, an example I used in the past, do we want to have a party on Saturday? Of course, you need to have the numbers. You need to have a sense of how much money you have, whom to invite, all the facts and all the logic. But at some point, it's a project. Is it a good project? Saturday, maybe Sunday? Can people come on Saturday? So you start kind of negotiating and deliberating about what's good, what's the right thing to do, what the sort of acceptable or preferable world we want to live in. And that is where ethics kicks in. So if you like, of all the disciplines, although we treat ethics almost like a nice to have, is the center of all the philosophical understanding. Everything we do is in order to do ethics better. So it's a bit like a traveling plan, a journey. Well, where you want to get is what determines all the steps you take. Of course, where you start from and all the steps are crucial, otherwise you don't get there. But the whole project, well, that's what matters. So to me, ethics is really what helps us to shape the human project.
Professor Luciano, you propose the idea of informational ethics to address questions arising from the development of new technologies. How does it differ from traditional ethical approaches, and could you provide some practical example of this application?
Sure. I think it's a matter of continuity. So it's not like, oh, it's nothing that we ever done before or it's completely. Ethics develops also because we have new problems, new components of this human project, new challenges. Technology, for example, generates a lot of new challenges. And the way our society is organized changes also what is more pressing or less pressing and so on. So that as history, knowledge, science, technology change through the centuries and the millennia, ethics gets more involved and richer in terms of what needs to be discussed, analyzed, designed, etc. So continuity. Continuity, however, means writing the new chapter in the big book of Western ethics. And the new chapter to me today is the one that obviously has got to do with the digital revolution, the information society, all these new technologies, which have really represented a new chapter in human history. So new chapter in human history, new chapter in the big book of ethics. So continuity, but novelty. Examples of that sort of novelty, but also examples of continuity. Let me give you one example of continuity, human dignity. Of course, human dignity has been with us, and we've been discussing this for a long, long time. It was different during when we were Greeks. It was different when we were Romans. It was different when we were, etc., etc. But we have enriched, modified, expanded. Today, human dignity also includes, for example, privacy, which was not really something in the past. It's not that it wasn't there, or we didn't. I mean, there are pages in Augustine about privacy, but they're completely different. They talk about the God knowing what you do, etc. So you don't really have privacy, so to speak. But we read those pages with the eyes of someone from the 21st century. Now, privacy was not something that was a priority for ethics. It became, a couple of decades ago, a crucial point. I mean, you don't have a debate today about ethics and technology without privacy and blah, blah, blah. Let me give you another example. Agency. Classically, all ethics has been constantly and only focused on human agency. Sometimes it includes animal agency, not as in producing sort of something that is ethically not charged, but in terms of respect for human, respect for animal suffering or animal identity and peculiarities and so on, the richness of an environment, environmental ethics. But we didn't discuss in the past what happens if you have a autonomous, self-learning piece of technology out there that do things instead of us, better than us, etc. Now, I'm not someone who supports a strong view of artificial intelligence. I think that is a mistake, epistemologically and metaphysically speaking. But I can see how the agency has to be reinterpreted, and we need to have a more sort of expanded concept of agency that includes also mindless, silly, autonomous, self-learning agency. So these are just two examples, but we keep going. So privacy, agency, responsibility. we live in a world where responsibility now is more distributed. In the past, if you read even Kant, the idea of responsibility is individual. Either you have done that or you haven't done that. Did you know what you were doing? You were not knowledgeable about it, etc. Today, we all contribute to much wider effects, and each of us might have a small part in a much more distributed system. Distributed responsibility, something totally new. But continuity, we still talk about responsibility. It's just that we need to add that chapter. So I can keep going, but we don't have time. But you can see now just a few concepts: responsibility, agency, privacy, etc. These are all important issues that, let me give you an idea. Bias. It's not that we didn't have bias in the past, but when I was an undergraduate, there was not even the word bias in the index of an ethics textbook. Today, you can't get away without discussing bias. So the question is like, oh, so it's totally new? No. It's totally old? No. It's no. In the big development of ethics, we're adding this interesting new chapter, but we need to write it, and we need to write it as contemporary philosophers. Let me close with this. It is not enough, in fact, it's a mistake to think that the past is the past. We just have to apply what we learned from the past to the present. It will be like, as if we were in modern times and think, look, the antiquity and Middle Age did all the job. All we need to do now is apply what the ancient philosophers had done for us. No novelty. But then we had an immense season of development from Descartes all the way to Kant, no, if you like, Wittgenstein. We need to be more responsible and own our time, and therefore produce the philosophy that we need today. Build on the past, but look at the next step. If we don't have the courage to take that next step, we will be irrelevant. The 21st century will develop, our society will move forward, the digital revolution will happen, and philosophy will not have joined the conversation. That is a disaster. We need philosophy as part of that conversation, together with all the other disciplines and policy making and decision making and so on. But without philosophy there, mistakes will be more likely to happen.
Yeah, I was asking a question about agency and responsibility, but I believe you answer it. So I will ask a more practical question. So you're talking about philosophers joining the conversation, and before we were talking about your formation, something that concerns me is the tendency of students, for example, to treat AI as a homogeneous concept. When I studied AI in PhD, we were talking about like search algorithms, stuff like that. When people think about AI today, they're thinking about LLMs and stuff like that. So my practical question is, how much do you believe that somebody that is interested in ethics of AI must know about AI?
Well, that was also my concern when I was younger. I wanted to, I came from a philosophical tradition that had respect for science and knowledge, without being subject to some kind of a religious kind of attitude towards science critically, but more like in the Kantian tradition, like you talk to science, you discuss science, you know what you're talking about, you are knowledgeable and fluent and conversant, as we say in English, with the discipline. That's why I decided to work so much on philosophy of science and mathematical logic. So the first half of my life, academically speaking, is getting a little bit less than half now that I'm getting old. But for the first 15 years or so of my life, I was a professor of mathematical logic. When I used to teach, say, first order maths, so mathematical logic, the idea was like there was not much difference, for example, in the 90s, early 90s, between what we were teaching as first order calculus, so to speak, and AI. AI was a branch of mathematical logic. Then you're right, we started developing more and more specialized areas. And above all, we had this massive change, a few years ago, 5, 6, 7, depends on where you want to put it, not more than a decade, where we move from AI as a branch of mathematical logic to AI as a branch of statistics. It's an immense shift. We no longer work in terms of deduction. We work in terms of statistical say correlation. Obviously, it's a different world. The point about knowing what you're talking about is essential. I do not support and I do not encourage the philosophy that simply talks without even understanding what it's talking about. And there's plenty of that. Unfortunately, I have to say, some of it generated in a post-Heideggerian kind of and post-deconstructionist perspective. It's sad to see philosophers talking about something they do not know, they do not understand, simply because they think that philosophy can talk about everything, it doesn't matter. It never was that way. I mean, your Plato, your Aristotle, your Descartes, your Kant, your Wittgenstein, pick up now, your Locke, John Locke, your Leibniz, your Hobbes, keep going. They knew what they were talking about. To the extent that Leibniz actually is a co-inventor of calculus. To the extent that Kant used to give lectures in geography and so on. That someone like Wittgenstein had a degree almost in engineering. Descartes was a military engineer. I mean, we owe to Descartes the Cartesian axis. So these people, they knew. Even Husserl had a PhD in mathematics. Now, it's only recently in the postmodern tradition that we have philosophers talking about something they don't know, they don't understand, and they do not respect. Now, that is a bad development, and it's made philosophy irrelevant. We're not cooler, just people don't listen. And it becomes an internal kind of dialogue, a joke among a few philosophers talking to each other in their own jargon in a way that the world doesn't care and does not touch the world. Now, that is, I hope, just a glitch, just a moment. We'll go back to normal philosophy, where a philosopher, as I said before, is interested in understanding and knowledge. So the difficult, and I come to the end of my answer, is like, okay, how do I do that? Because I'm just an individual. How can I possibly know everything about, say, large language model or foundation models to be even more inclusive, okay? And do I need to read those technical papers? But at the same time, do I need also know about sociology? Because of course this is crucial, and political science and legal systems. I mean, not even Leonardo or somebody. There is a solution, which is collaboration. That's why I said join the dialogue. So if you look at a lot of my publications, not my books, because of course those are a single author, but my papers, my research papers, I collaborate with legal scholars, with sociologists, with data scientists, computer scientists, AI experts, etc. And so recently we published a paper on regulation and impact the metaverse a couple of years ago, for example. Well, we pick up the phone and we spoke to the people actually producing the technology. And so we got feedback from Meta. We acknowledge that. Now, these days we're working on some open source, some impact of open source in foundation models. And then we're talking, of course, to the community of computer scientists working on open source / free software, etc., because they know. In this center that I direct here at Yale, we have computer scientists, data scientists, legal scholars, experts, geography people, medical ethics experts. We are hiring people in international relations, in data science, in social science. That's how you progress, by having a dialogue and having respect for what humanity is good at. Let me crack a final comment here. Like, it is insane in a world so complex like the one we live in to think that a single philosopher can single-handedly solve everything, discuss everything, understand everything, and on top of that, ignore what some of the best minds that ever existed put together. This is insane. I mean, anyone in the street would understand that immediately. But we in academia, we start getting into our own little corner and thinking, oh, I don't need to know. I can be a philosopher of mind, but I don't need to know about cognitive science. I don't need to know about neuroscience. I have my little problems. Well, let me tell you, your little problems are of little concern to anyone else. So the reason why you do not find me in a philosophy department is because I chose some years ago when I was given the opportunity to join a social science context. I love philosophy. I'm a philosopher. I will never do anything else but philosophy. I will die as a philosopher, but I want to talk to people who are doing something else. Final comment for the people who are listening to this, philosophy is like the salt in the kitchen. You put it on something else. If you eat only salt, you die of poisoning. And that's what happens in a philosophy department where we all talk to each other about philosophers, not philosophical, philosophers' problems among ourselves, to ourselves, for ourselves, the conference, the journals. Meanwhile, the world doesn't care at all. It's like eating salt all the time. You're killing yourself.
Great answer, Professor Luciano. I agree in your words. Professor Luciano, you described this formation of society, this era of infosphere. In a nutshell, Professor Luciano Florida, what are the problematics in dealing with ethics, AI, and the markets? For example, the relationship between free markets and human rights. It's a common problem in economic philosophy.
Yeah. Well, part of the this idea of a new environment is also part of the answer to the previous questions. Like we live in a different world. The digital revolution has changed the world, and it keeps changing it so profoundly that it's changing the nature of the environment in which we live. Since we are among philosophers, we can use the right word. It's changing the ontology of the world in which we live. To use another extra word, meaning it's re-ontologizing our world. If you have a revolution that is re-ontologizing in a very simple sense, changing the intrinsic nature of the world in which we live, which was when I was an undergraduate, since we mentioned the biographical moment, was entirely analog. And people like me, I think that I'm not sure about you guys, saw it from 100% analog to increasingly also digital. Then you need to have new words. So some time ago, I started talking about this new environment as an infosphere. The experience that we live is neither online or offline, is on life, meaning is constantly mixed, digital, analog, online, offline, all the time. Like this conversation we're having. Are we online? Are we offline? Well, I'm sitting here, you're sitting there, but we're also having a conversation which is totally connected. So we need a new vocabulary, we need a new perspective, but we also need to hurry up because the social and environmental problems we have are being made more acute by the digital revolution. The digital revolution can and should be part of the solution. It could help with society and could help with the environment. But at the moment, as we speak, 27 March 2025, is part of the problem. It's damaging the environment and increasing social issues, migration, violence, abuse, bias, you name it, and of course, polarization, digital divide, all that. Can we use all this digital revolution to make a difference, positive, to society and environment? Yes. Meaning we need a human project, a political project, and an ethical project. That's why I'm so excited. I mean, there's immense work. I mean, we are on the verge of a revolution. We need all the philosophers we can possibly put together. This is our Normandy landing moment, so to speak. It's the moment in which we can make a big difference. Once this digital revolution will have landed, so to speak, solidified, it will be really hard to change. But we are at that stage in history where things are still in flux, flexible. We can make a difference. The cement is not hard yet. We can shape it. We have another, I don't know, a few decades, another generation. At some point, we will see what happens. And the excitement in terms of working with the infosphere, on life, etc., is to say, okay, what kind of project we want to have. Now, let me give you one example. So that there's a lot of philosophical kind of high level. Well, we need to rethink both democracy and capitalism. The democracy we had and the capitalism we have had, they were not so bad, but they don't work anymore. So can we rethink democracy 2.0 and capitalism 2.0, so to speak? Better no, terminology, forgive me. For the 21st century, who's going to do it? Not the sociologists, not the economists, the philosophers. But we need the philosophers. We need the people who have the right questions in mind. So that's why the excitement. And that's why the call to arms, so to speak, to all the other colleagues. Stop thinking in terms of this is philosophers' problems and therefore that's my career, and start thinking about the philosophical problems we have today. They're very pressing. Then we will be very welcome at any table. Final comment, that's my experience. People need and want philosophy, but they don't want the academic philosophy that, no, it's kind of speculating on its own little uninteresting issues. They want to have a philosopher or philosophers at the table together with the other people, from the legislator to the company people and so on. So there's a lot of work to be done out there. We need to raise our sort of game quite a bit.
Yeah, we are opening here in Brazil specialization in ethics of AI. That's why I liked your last answer, because I'm going to show the video to my students, because I'm going to give the course of
Excellent.
basic notions of AI. So I'll jump a little some questions, because I believe has more to do with what you're talking now. So do you believe that AI ethics could create jobs opportunities for philosophers outside academia? Because that's a problem we have in philosophy courses, right? After all, the ethical discussion about AI are urgent, as you're saying, in various sectors, and philosophy is the home of ethics.
Yep. Well, it's well, first of all, the good news, which is the best way to learn about ethics is in philosophy, wherever that philosophy is done, maybe as in a philosophy department or in a branch of social science. For example, when I did my degree at Warwick, my philosophy department was part of the social sciences. When I went to Oxford, philosophy was part of humanities. So it doesn't matter where we are, but it's a philosophy business. That's where we are good at. So, and no one is as good as philosophers when it comes to ethics. It's really our own core business. End of the story. So that's the good news. The also not so bad news is that learning more and understanding profoundly what it means to provide normative insights and analysis, it's a valuable, crucial skill that any company and any government, any agency will welcome. Now, why do I say that is no also good news, but not super good news? Is because we also live in a world where doing the right thing and pointing out what the right thing to do is sometimes is not welcome. It's not that every company, every government, every agency out there is trying to understand what's the best thing to do. Unfortunately, it's a very Hobbesian, Thomas Hobbes kind of world, where there is also a lot of competition, a lot of cutthroat, short-cutting sort of solutions, where people don't care about what's right, don't care about what is good, but care more about what is convenient, economically valuable, the expedient that gets me there faster, the competitions. So let me close, however, with another bit of good news. So good news for philosophy, we are the expert. Good news for people learning about this, because they will be a little bit, in some places, very welcome by society at large. But what is the really, really good news is that we need this precisely because the world is not a paradise. Exactly because we don't live in utopia. We need ethicists. So independently of whether the student will think in terms of that gives me a job, above all, that gives you a standing position in society. And that seems to me part of education, which is not utilitarian in essence. It's not, oh, what is useful for, but it's more like, what is the right thing to do when you are educating, say, new citizens? A pinch of ethics in this good sense of understanding and being able to provide analysis and insights on difficult topics of a normative nature, that is crucial. So it's good news, kind of good news, good news.
So Jose, I believe your question about the role of government is a good place right now.
What? What question?
Yeah, because I scrambled the questions, right? You can go to your next one about the
Okay.
role of political institutions and etc.
Okay. Professor Luciano, what is the role of political institution in the regulation of AI, and who could they contribute to legal security and ethical standard with society?
So, and of course, as you may imagine, the role of political institutions is, or governments broadly understood, is vital. They can promote or kill any technology. It takes one piece of legislation, and they also support or not the development of technology. The point I'm making is sometimes underestimated through what we call procurement. Procurement, for the students who might be listening to this, is when some bit of the state buys from private companies supplies, services, goods, etc. So imagine you decide that every department in Brazil needs to have a AI service of a particular kind. Boom, all of a sudden you're promoting that to a level that is amazing. When say the police buys that kind of car rather than the other kind of car, boom, that car goes, and this happens all the time. So we need to remember that the state has, if you like, I'm always simplifying, two roles. One as a regulator, but the other one is as customer. We should not forget the customer role. The state invests enormously in terms of what it buys, what it doesn't buy, what it privileges or not in terms of goods, services, and so on. So once you get these two kind of perspectives in line, you understand that sort of political, governmental institutions, agencies, and so on have a huge influence. They make the rule of the game and they play in the game of which they made the rules. It doesn't get any better than that. So getting the politics right, both in terms of regulation and policies, and in terms of procurement, what you buy, what you don't, is vital. We see this these days in international problems about tariffs, for example, on import and export. When it comes to AI, which is, as I said, it's not a very new discipline if you consider the history of AI from Alan Turing onwards. It's about 70 or so years old. But if you look at the very recent statistical kind, it's very new. It's just a few years old. The involvement of governments will determine the success or the failure of that specific technology, that model, rather than another. Final example, so the students, again, if whoever is listening knows that you can go all the way down to something concrete. Imagine, for example, that a government decides to use only open source AI. All of a sudden, open source get an immense boost. It's the end of the business in that country for proprietary software, proprietary AI, and we live in a different world. This is crucial. These are political decisions that move billions of dollars. So between the ethics, the law, and the policy on one side, and the business, the money, the procurement, the service and goods on the other, getting the government right is essential. But as I said, I'm just sort of confirming something that everybody knows.
I would like to talk a little bit about the poor causing of ethics, epistemology. So you have some kind of normativity in the same sense. And I believe when you get like the social turn in epistemology also has an important role in the understanding of this new world. So, for example, how do you think that the inclusion of AI in social networks make the problem more difficult. For example, if you compare fake news and like deep fake videos or stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, this it is a difficult topic, partly because we've never been here before. We have never had the experience of some kind of autonomous self-learning agency that operates within our network of interactions and exchanges. So that is already the novelty. It's a little bit like with a metaphor, having a chessboard, and all of a sudden you decide you have a new piece on the chessboard. It is not just the king or the queen, etc. It's a chessboard piece number X. Well, the game has changed completely. What does it do? What does it not do? How it interacts with all the other pieces? What rules we need to devise, etc. Epistemologically, this has generated very interesting new questions, which were already there, but not so much. I mean, as usual, it's a matter of priority, not like never heard before. In the same sense, as I said before, that privacy was always an issue, but only now has become the tip of the iceberg. Before it was submerged, no one really discussed it very much, but all of a sudden, boom, it's crucial. In our case, in epistemology, we have very similar issues. For example, the distributed nature of knowledge today is at the forefront of the debate, whereas in the past, like, no, it was something, but no one really cared. If you like, from Descartes to Popper, the emphasis has always been on the individual. You read Wittgenstein on certainty, and again, it's on the individual. What I know, what I don't know, what I can know, where I can be mistaken, am I being misled, am I relying on the wrong sources, does my belief have any ground? No, true justified beliefs, all those things. And that one individual, it could be humanity as an individual, or it could be Peter, John, Mary, Laura as single individual. It could be the Cartesian individual, the Kantian transcendental I and self, and so on. It doesn't matter. It's a single thing. Knowledge resides in a single unit, whether it's huge, humanity, or tiny, like a single individual person. Today, distributed knowledge and distributed information is crucial. The other thing which I brought to the table of philosophical analysis is I just mentioned it. In the past, before, allow me to say this is a bit embarrassing, but before my work, philosophers were interested in information up to a certain point. I mean, there was work done, but it was always, say, someone like Dresky, for example, whom I knew very well, and he passed away years ago, great epistemologist. He was using information theory to do epistemology. He was still using concepts from their field to do what was classically epistemology in the right way. But the other way around, like do epistemological work with information, about information, well, that was not something that we were doing at the time. That's why I spoke already in the 90s about a philosophy of information. So you got new topics, new scenarios, like distributed information, new topics, information itself, new methodologies. But today, for example, the whole world of simulation, sandboxing, beta testing, these are all ways in which we test knowledge before actually doing anything. Let me give you another example. The whole legal system is completely different now than it was like, say, 50 years ago. Because today we have precisely a way of testing laws. Say, what happens if we do this and this and that? Say, what happens, for example, if we change this, when shops can open downtown in Rio de Janeiro, just to make a city I know. I didn't tell you, but my wife is Brazilian, by the way, so I'm more acquainted with the country than I should be. So, well, these days we can run a simulation. We can do something in silico. New epistemology, new models, new everything. So there is a lot of that. And it seems to me that there's a lot of catching up to do. I've done part of the work in the past. I now move to more as normative issues. but there's still so much more that we need to understand.
So, Professor Luciano, one central characteristic of humanity it is imaginative capacity. What is the danger posed by AI in potentially erode this imagination, particularly its creative aspect by replacing human work?
I think it's one of the dangers of AI that is so easy to use, and it gives you that sense of being able to produce an answer to any question you ask, etc., without checking, without making the effort of getting from the question to the answer. The danger is obvious and is there. A couple of things to see whether it can be minimized or overcome. But first of all, we are at the beginning of this revolution. The hope is that people will, in terms of education and social expectations, will learn how to use this technology intelligently. The analogy here is with the overabundance of cheap food. What happens in a context where cheap food is abundant and it doesn't cost much, but is very unhealthy, is that people get obese. Obesity, as you know, in the United States, is a huge, immense, sorry for the pun, but is a catastrophic problem. A big chunk of the population is obese. Why? Because there's no education. There's no sense. So is it the fault of the food or the fault of the people? Well, it's a bit of both. I mean, the food is nice, appealing. It talks to our worst instincts. And we are not built to resist that temptation. We are built anthropologically, not genetically, to eat as much as possible because you never know whether you're going to eat tomorrow. That's our animal side, so to speak, as organism. Eat today because tomorrow you may not find anything to eat for another couple of days. And so the combination of this is clearly obesity. Well, with the analogy, AI is generating a similar problem. We're generating sort of epistemologically obese people in the sense that they get used to ask the question, don't even care about even typing the question correctly, because if you make some typos, it doesn't matter. The interface will get it anyway. Get the answer, whatever the answer is. And it might be not even correct. It might be an hallucination, as we say in the context, or it might be just approximate. It might be even a bit silly mistake. It doesn't matter. It's an answer, and you keep going. It's food anyway. So, well, with that is huge. But the analogy with obesity also speaks in terms of solution. Well, today we know that we shouldn't eat that stuff. Menus increasingly come with amount of calories. We are told since the beginning, no, don't eat too much, don't eat that fat, don't eat that things, no, too much sugar, etc., etc. So we're learning. We're learning slowly, more slowly than we should, and I hope that the AI impact will be absorbed more quickly. But society knows better. Now, whether individuals will save themselves, that's another story. But, and I'm coming to the end of my answer, there are ways of doing a good job. So to protect, for example, the creativity of what questions you want to ask, what answers you want to accept, what can you do about having better answers, what you do with the answers you finally get, what for, etc. All this is training that we start sort of implementing these days from the first years of education onwards. But we need to start. The pedagogical effort to sort of teach people how to use these tools is vital. In a different analogy, it's a little bit like telling people how to drive. You just don't put someone behind the seat and then go. Like, you tell them this is how it goes, and safety measures and so on. So I think AI will be, as I said in the past, will be a God-sent, extraordinary tool in the hands of the experts, those who know how to use it, and it will be a disaster in the hands of the naive, the people who are used by AI to believe something. So we need to make sure that that group doesn't get taken for a ride, is not exploited, is not left behind. So essentially, another way of saying the new digital divide between those who know how to use this stuff and those who don't, we need to bridge that. but the digital divide is there. And so it is a problem. Once again, what is the kind of society we want to live in? What's the human project to make sure that we take care of that problem?
Great answer, Professor Luciano. Last question. I read your paper on formational structural realism and was very curious about your strong position. Congratulations. Professor, how does your technology redefine what is meant to be human enrolled in creating big data? And do you believe it's possible to remain critically optimistic about the informational reality?
Mm-hmm. So I think that for some time now, we just got into this digital age where it is easier and it's good to conceptualize ourselves as data subjects or informational organisms or inforgs. It doesn't mean that that's what we are. It means that that's how we conceptualize ourselves in this particular time. I said it's natural because of all that goes on around us. And after all, we speak about information society, digital revolution, etc. So it's natural to have that kind of perspective. But also, I think that is a good thing. So it's not just, oh, that's what's happening. It's good that it happens. It makes sense to, for example, have a sense of a patient as a data patient, because that's what we are actually doing to the patient. We collect data. We want to make sure that those data are accurate, that they actually treat the right kind of sickness or shortcoming or problem, etc. So it's a matter of coherence, and that's all fine. It is crucial, vital, essential not to lose sight of how much more humanity is. I mean, you can't reduce just an individual to a data subject. Of course, that individual is also maybe, in my case, it's a husband, is also a member of society, is a citizen who votes, is someone who walks down the park, is a 60 years old owner of 2 passports, one Italian, one British, etc., etc. So there's so much more than just, a data subject in hospital is a patient. So in a paper that I published recently, I said, look, no, the risk that we run is that the digital interface is so attractive, so useful, so malleable, we can do so much with it, that we lose sight of the analog system that the digital model is representing. This eclipse of the analog, the disappearance of the analog when it comes to the model in front of us, that would be a disaster. It would be, for example, treating every student just as a profile on a computer. Every sort of worker in human resource in a company as just what you find on the Excel file. Reducing a patient only to the data you have about their patient. We saw this during COVID. It did happen. So to me, a way of answering your question is to make sure that the eclipse of the analog does not happen. Final point, why is so crucial? Because the analog is boundlessly, has no limit in terms of richness of information. Whereas the model, well, it's just a model of that particular aspect rather than another. Once you have collected all the data about me and my sort of heart conditions, that's all you have. But me, like as an individual, you can keep extracting more and more and more information. It's endless, because the analog is a continuum. With a small analogy from elementary mathematics, there are infinite number of points between 0 and 1 in terms of real numbers. You can dig more and more and more. Oh, but look, it's just 0 and 1. How can there be an infinite amount of real numbers between 0 and 1? Well, if you know enough mathematics, you keep cutting and cutting and cutting and finding between, etc. So there is a sense in which the loss of the analog would be a disaster of the digital revolution. What's the solution? It is to stop halfway through, not to be reactionary and say, turn off the digital revolution, we don't want to have it, it's all not terrible and problems, but don't go all the way to say, oh, it's marvelous, it's all fantastic, it's all rosy picture, nothing better than, forget about the other. Halfway through, in a sort of Aristotelian sense, middle ground. Make sure that we keep the analog and we keep the digital, so that the combination between the two gives us the kind of human project that I was telling you before. A world in which we have a decent society and a safe environment. We can do that, but we need to get the philosophy right. And at the moment, we're not there yet, which is good news for the philosophers because there's a lot of work to do.
La ringrazio sinceramente per questa intervista e per il tempo che ci ha dedicato José Mayubi Pafcio Episteme. È stato un piacere conversare con lei.
Grazie a voi.
Grazie.
Yeah, I will not say anything because I don't know Italian. So thank you.
Danilo, with that name, Danilo, you know Italian?
Yeah, Brazil is all mixed up, right?
I
don't know. I don't even know why my name is Danilo, but it's not. I'm not have Italian descent.
No. No. My wife family is a little bit originally Portuguese and a little bit from the Amazonian forest. So it's really also they're all completely mixed. I mean, all different skins, all different colors, all different languages. So it's very nice. She's Carioca. She comes from Rio. Yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much. I hope I wasn't too long. Difficult question, so we'll see.